I will make a brief introduction, and my role here is to introduce two important guest speakers. So Professor Ikeda is, I always joke about her contribution to the society. She's like a godmother of COIL program, Collaborative Online International Learning. So she will talk about the digital platform for students to engage global learning. So it's so many different type of COIL models, and she will illustrate new initiative. And another important guest is Professor Craig Shealy. He is from Western Washington University, and he is an assessment expert, and particularly cross-cultural learning. So he will talk about his product, Baby. Baby is an assessment tool for the global learning to assess the students' learning for the cross-cultural learning. So my role is here is to make my speech short as possible. So I will just briefly go over what we are going to accomplish in this session. So last year, like everybody else, last year was a very tough year for international educators and practitioners. So we are wondering what is the best approach for our students. So we use a lot different type of social network, and also in my case, I have a research consortium for international education. So we offered different type of webinars or conference. So we talk about what type of paradigm shift we are facing for international education. So we need to revalue or revisit, evaluate our own program, and also we want to have a new type of, we like to offer new type of partnership programs. And also finally, we discuss what is the best way, best remedies we can offer for students. So we talk about alternative programs under COVID-19. And also we did a conference, like IAFOR conference, we did 100% online, but actually we found it was quite successful conference because we were able to invite those people who did not attend our conference before. So 100% online is, in a way, it's a good to invite a different type of audience. And we discuss alternative international programs and cross-registration. Online cross-registration is relatively easy to start because everybody now offering class online. So we can just open the window for registration window for other university students. So we take some students from other school. And so it's not difficult for us to do that. And also online joint classroom is, which Keiko Ikeda will talk about later. So virtual exchange. So joint teaching online or virtual exchange. So collaborative online international learning is already started even before the COVID-19, but during the COVID-19, we found more benefit or effect for COIL program. And we have not tried yet hybrid international program because we cannot do face-to-face. So at this moment, we haven't experimented yet, but we try to do in the future. So in this model, pre and post program is offered online, and then face-to-face will be a very brief and cost-effective program. So in this way, we have more low risk and low cost program. And finally, we discussed the possibility to develop a online student conference, like a model United Nations. So which is also very promising. So we use this model on the network called UMAP. You may not have heard about UMAP yet, but UMAP stands for University Mobility in Asia and the Pacific. It was started in 1991 and with a strong initiative of Australian government. This is the first picture took at the first meeting of UMAP. So all the participants come from different country, university leaders and the government leaders. So it's a voluntary association, consists of government leader and non-government university leader. It consists of currently 21 countries and regions, and it's a multilateral student exchange model. It's like Erasmus. And my university was international secretariat until December last year, but from January this year, 2021, Vancouver Community College and British Columbia Council on International Education, BCCIE, both are responsible for taking care of the international secretariat of UMAP. So this is the first time North American institutions is supporting UMAP important role. Within the UMAP network, we started exchange online, basically online cross-registration. So we practice a new program. 18 universities from 8 countries participated in this program for semester 2021. So 76 academic courses are offered through this program. And as I mentioned, UMAP is originally focusing on the physical mobility, but last year we could not do any physical mobility. So basically, physical mobilities are on hiatus. So we are now focusing on the online project. Another attempt is a student conference. So this student-led conference was started last August, but we will have a second Model United Nations online this month. So we expect nearly 100 delegates from 30 different universities around the world. So this is also a new initiative. And finally, we have experience already COIL program, Collaborative Online International Learning, 2019, based on the UMAP. So UMAP COIL started 2 years ago, and last year, 100 online. And this year, we are quite excited to start a new program for high school students. So UMAP COIL Advanced Placement Program will be started in the fall semester to 2021. So Keiko Ikeda will discuss the detail of the information. So now I like to hand on the microphone to Keiko Ikeda, who is an expert of COIL. Thank you. So this is my end of my introduction. So Keiko,
okay,
are you ready?
Yes. Now, yeah, and let me share my slide. I hope you can see it. Okay. All right. Well, thank you so much for the introducing the whole overview about the UMAP COIL programs. I'd like to talk about that mainly today. Once again, my name is Keiko Ikeda from Kansai University, and I would like to start talking about a little bit about this whole theme, the core theme that has been suggested by Shingo, about adapting digital platform in education in general and the international education. So since the pandemic time, there have been many digital platforms that are made in use for higher educational institutions. I think it was mentioned that in the beginning as well, such as Teams, Discord, Slack, Zoom, Google Meet, and others, just to name a few. There are lots and lots of more. For international education too, this is not an exception. And mobility not being available at the moment, so various programs have opted to pivot online and adapting these platforms. There are various benefits for the online mode of teaching and learning, and as you can see in the slide. And that being made more salient aware among the educators and other stakeholders in itself brings the potential. I think there's been a paradigm shift in the perspective on this digital learning and teaching. Online mode of teaching and learning stops the spread of biological viruses, for sure. And it's good for minimizing harmful emissions and to lower greenhouse gases. Expertise available to more sites now because of no geographic barriers there. And it minimizes the travel and accommodation costs, so the whole program, it would be considerably low as well. There seems to be a growing interest on online mode of education, teaching and learning, and more to this kind of online collaborative learning, not MOOCs kind. On top of these lists that I mentioned about here, online collaborative learning like COIL pedagogy would emphasize these 3 C's: communication, the ability to exchange information between participants; coordination, the ability to coordinate tasks among the geographically scattered team; and collaboration, the ability to achieve team goals. So the key understanding or concept to share would be, if you can collaborate online, you can absolutely learn online. This is resulting in the explosion of online training and education at the moment, and it looks like it will grow further. As one of the non-traditional pedagogies in international education was mentioned by Shingo, at my center, COIL is being promoted at Kansai University, and we liaison with UMAP for various actions. And let me introduce a bit about what my center does in order to promote COIL and virtual exchange in Japan and beyond first, then move on to talk about the UMAP COIL programs. So I play a principal project manager role at the center called IIJE at Kansai University. We launched it in October 2018 upon becoming a flagship institution for the next initiative to promote COIL practices in Japan that year. It explores various novel pedagogies for global education to generate future-ready graduates, particularly by creating global classrooms through practice like COIL. So COIL, for those who have heard about it for the first time, is in actual practice will look like this in this slide. You are actually looking at the 2 types of COIL here, one mainly done in a synchronous real-time style, Malaysia and Japan, which only has about 2-hour time difference, and others doing COIL with Mexico. So a majority of the activities are done in asynchronous style, non-live style. And COIL involves, as you see, in project-based learning as the main task design for collaborative learning. The types may be very diverse. They can be taking the form of research or media product or business pitch or business plans or action plans to propose to start social actions, etc. So these tasks are done in a virtually met diverse groups together. With a strong push on the practice, we worked on building a community among universities that promote or want to develop a COIL curriculum on their campus called Japan COIL Association. And this also began in 2018, the same year that the IIG launched. Currently, we have about 29 universities listed in this slide. They joined the association. We have a couple times of assembly annually among ourselves, and they are able to participate in a workshop, seminar, training programs, etc. that IIGE provides. We're running on the grant-based funding at the moment, so there's no membership fee attached. So if you're interested, please do contact us. Just to share how COIL has brought as a various international partnership, many have formed sustainable relationship for a university. So in 2018 to 2020, IIGE Kansai University has successfully with over 42 COIL projects with 23 US institutions. And the ones in green that you see in the slide are the ones that we have developed university level partnership in parallel to having a partnership in COIL practice. For the organization and network, we built alliance with ACE, American Council on Education, and UMAP. Just recently made an MOU with the Alex Foundation, Alliance for Language Learning and Education Exchange in the United States, COIL Connect by John Rubin, and currently working on a link with Latin America COIL Network. So we do various seminars with the associate members. Before COVID, more face-to-face ones, but with the COVID now, we're doing lots more online seminars and webinars. We'll most likely move on to a high flex mode, meaning that there's people in face-to-face at the same time, there are people joining in online to conduct from here point. So let me move on to talk about the programs here. For UMAP COIL programs, I have to divide the story into two, as indicated in the Shingo slide. One in 2019, that is pre-COVID, when we carried out a program with mobility involved. And I think he described it as hybrid program. And the other is 2020, as you all know, with pandemic. And let me start with the 2019 version. And in this slide, you notice there are some numbers indicated here. For the moment, please ignore this, but I will come back to this at the end. So for 2019 program, there were 16 students who were able to join the program. They're from the 6 different countries. The whole program took place from July 1st through August 23rd for almost 2 months. It was comprised of 3-week pre-mobility COIL and a 1-week onshore seminar orientation in Osaka, the local city where my university is located. And then there was a 3-week long cruise program, collaboratively run with the Peace Boat. I'll explain a little bit more later. This pre-mobility COIL was mandatory for all participants. Zoom application was used for their live virtual session, and each session lasted no more than 1 hour. In the first half of the session, instructors and participants were together in one meeting room for a lecture. Then all attendees were assigned to several small breakout sessions for group discussion. And prior to their departure to the whole cruise ship on the Peace Boat, 11 international students took part in an 8-day orientation program in Osaka. During their stay, they participated in various exposure programs on site, Japanese language and culture classes, and program orientation hosted by Kansai University, etc., etc. In addition to their preparatory work, the students are also joined into the program sponsor company called One Visa for a COIL session as well. And this is a little bit of a scene from the Osaka camp and pre-mobility section. So they're really gearing up towards this mobility program part. And the mobility program was rather unique for this program. It actually was a cruise trip, as you see in the slide, run by an organization called Peace Boat. Peace Boat, there's a trip on the ship, and then the theme is around SDGs, particularly on peace and justice was their emphasis. There are approximately 1,000 passengers on the ship, and among them, 16 were our students. We chose to collaborate with the Peace Boat for this time because of its traveling destination. It was a cool Japan discovery trip when around Japan, stopping over various ports, as you see in the slide. We also went to Korea, Busan, and Vladivostok as 2 overseas ports as well. And they did not stay over each area. They only just stopped at the port and spend half or the whole day at the area to explore. But then at the end of the day, they are back to the ship to the next destination. And details of the onboard or offshore timeline is shown here. It might be a little too small for you to check the details. If you're interested, let me know. Along the way, in between visiting cities, we also had some virtual sessions on the ship, still continuing with the COIL essence of the whole program. On board, there were various educational programs provided by Peace Corps. Some of the guests that they brought to the program were people who we would not be able to get to meet, that often yourselves. So they were, in fact, a very important opportunity. And both Busan and Vladivostok, two overseas ports that we visited, we had interesting encounters as well. For example, a startup hub, companies hub in Russia, Vladivostok was our visit, and we saw some business pictures there. And also, we also had collaborative learning activities with the university in Busan, Korea. The whole program provided a very intensive learning opportunity for students, and they spent a long time together, facing each other from morning to the evening, as you can see on the ship. There's nowhere else to run away from that situation, and experienced many things, new things together. There are many things that happened along the way, as you can imagine. There are lots of laughs, of course. It was a great experience for everybody. As you can see, this is the picture at the end of the last of the program of the ship. And at times, of course, there were some cries with overwhelming input of cross-cultural encounters. And the next speaker will talk about this whole experience has impacted on them in terms of their ways of thinking and value systems. So moving on to a second program that we held in 2020, another UMAP COIL program was conducted with a different approach this time. And why is that? In 2020, as you know, many students were disappointed with the cancellation of various mobility programs. There were also an increase of anxiety among the students who had stayed behind at home with no contacts with the other students, and this has been happening universally. To rapidly respond to those changes in the context due to the pandemic crisis, we shifted the UMAP COIL program to be 100% COIL with no mobility program attached, and we also make this program free to enter. Another feature emerged was that our COIL courses purposely chose SDGs as the project theme. And this is due to the pandemic, of course. It's alarming need that we realize to revisit and cultivate international education that promotes diversity, equity, and inclusion in the global citizen mindset. Students need to understand the global phenomena. They have to be aware of the xenophobic and culture-bound reactions in the world that's happening along with the COVID crisis. And they have to go beyond to become prepared to work with the colleagues around the world to address global crisis. So for this 2020 program, we schemed this COIL program as this slide explains. So for example, for one, there was a 1 week, 4 hours worth of a icebreaker activity to get to know each other and also understanding deeply about SDGs. There were 5 lectures provided along with that lecture and also a small groups discussions. In parallel to that, there were a 4-week-long group work, which is the core activity in a COIL practice methodology. The small group was supposed to do a case study on SDGs, a social business that work around it. And they have to critically develop the analysis of that chosen business. And each group has 6 to 8 students in the group and 4 of 12 groups. And there was the final presentation at the end to the actual social business leaders. So the stakeholders, not only just the teachers, were present. We also invited the social business leaders in the world to meet the students during a series of lectures as well, to give them more authentic experience. So this is not just somebody else's business, but yours. This is an organization called MyMizu that you see in the slide, which is trying to reduce the PET bottle use of a water supply by creating a network of the restaurants and public spaces to provide free refill of drinking water in Japan. We had a total of 140 students in 2020 programs. If this were brick and mortar traditional classroom setting, this would be a large class to handle, as you can imagine, and it may just end up being a big lecture style. But when it is a virtual class in COIL method, things can be arranged so that the active participations are made more available. For example, we have applied to integrate 3 modes of learning and teaching during the program. So we had the whole class engagement mode. We call it one-to-many, so total of 140 students. And then we broke them into a small virtual groups for discussion. So it is a 1-to-1 mode of teaching and learning. And then finally, in the group work, they form a group of with the other 6 to 7 students. So this created a one among many learning. We also formed a very diverse and international group for the collaborative task. So as you can see here, a student from Japan, for instance, was able to meet up and work together with the students from 3 or 4 countries at once. This may not happen if we were doing bilateral one-to-one COIL or even to send them out to study abroad to a single country. So this is an advantage for COIL pedagogy. Each group has brought in various tools and they wanted to use for our group work. They provided a particular platform, we provided a particular platform called enlarge to use. And they also use that too as a base. But in addition, they wanted to use the other social media, Google apps, etc. as well. There are many reasons why this multilateral collaboration was emphasized, particularly because of this crisis time. One reason is to get as many students as possible to be apart in order to break that isolation. With or without a chance of study abroad, as I said earlier, they felt cut off of a pre-existing learning community, feeling very much neglected from the usual support, which maybe they have had when they were going to school. Another is to establish a global learning for all, more inclusive ways to create non-biased international encounters. So for this program, we're able to have students from various rural islands of a country or region, or students who live in Tokyo. All of them participate and take active roles in it together. To recap the 2 programs and add a bit more information of the 2 groups of programs that we had, I promise to return back to the numbers listed in the slides I showed earlier. So for 2019, this was a slide. So these numbers meant there were 16 students participated, 28 were spent for actual physical mobility, and approximately 1,000 Japanese passengers on the ship. So we can perhaps say that they encountered many people from local community. 2 million yen was raised from private enterprise to support the whole program, mainly to support the mobility program. And lastly, 130,000 yen was individual students cost bearing, and some even had more scholarship to reduce the cost for the whole program. For 2020 program, we had 140 student participation. Students came from 11 countries and regions, and 12 small groups were formed for COIL project work, and 0 yen cost bearing by each student. So there are various differences in the content design of the program. So these numbers do not just tell the whole story. That's clear. Yeah, they do imply various interesting findings. So to think about traditional or non-traditional international education, the comparison of the 2 UMAP COIL programs here can be a very good reference or food for thought. As my last slide, I thought I will bring this up. International education had been always about transcending borders, as we all know that. And at times this was understood as education abroad dominantly, and other times more about internationalization at home. With our pandemic realization, what we learned by borders has started to refer to borders with a much wider and in-depth understanding. Townsend Walsh 2016 talked about border crossing pedagogy for all students. The borders were implicitly there as differences or diversity with the local society, cultures among the community, and they can be used as a resource to generate intercultural learning experience for a broad range of students on campus. It's been also said in the literature that COIL is also seen as one powerful approach to bring encounters with others, overcoming main obstacles. How this pedagogy of encounter will be applied in the next 10 years, for example, in higher educational institutions, at one point mobility will be back, that will be interesting phenomena to observe. And this will be the end of my presentation. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Keiko. Thank you, Keiko. So now we have a good questions. But we will answer those questions after we finish the final presenter. So now I like to introduce Craig Shealy, who is a father of baby project, and he's also actually involved. He's involved so many different types of cross-cultural learning, and he participated UMAP COIL program since the beginning, and particularly when we had a program in Japan, 2019, he brought his students, and then also he himself committed himself to bring in a assessment tool called Baby. So we like to invite Craig to give a presentation about his project. Okay.
Hello, everybody. I'm trying to be able to share my screen here. Let me see if I'm able to do that. There we go. Is that working? Can you see this? Great.
Yes, yes.
So thank you to Professor Ikeda, Professor Ashizawa for the introduction, and to all of you. Nice to see you from the United States here in the evening the day before. So yeah, this has been a fascinating process of trying to learn and understand about the impact of collaborative online international learning, and how can you measure these complex learning processes and outcomes. And so we have a project that I'm going to describe to you today that involves a lot of different people and organizations. It's a multi-year project, a complex project, but one where we're beginning to find some quite fascinating results. So I'm going to go ahead and just get right into this. Let me see if there we go. So I want to first,
Craig,
yes.
Craig, could you enlarge your slide?
Let me see. Any thoughts on how I might do that? Wait a minute, maybe up here. Let me see if this helps. Does that help?
Click on the arrow on the right hand to get rid of the column. There's a little triangle thing on the right column. You see that, the list of PDF.
Yeah.
There's a little triangle. You can click on it to close it. Go down. It's on the right.
You see my cursor?
Yes.
Okay, so where should
go to a little bit to the right.
To the right.
There's a little triangle right above it. A little bit further in the midway of your screen.
This way, Keiko, or I'm trying to think what I'm trying to see that. Do you see the triangle on my screen? Because
yes, Craig. Go to the arrow. It's an arrow that's pointing to the right.
When you say arrow that's pointing to the right, I am.
Yeah, I see your cursor. Go to the right. Go very slowly to the right.
Yes.
Just above there, you have a triangle.
You may see something I don't.
Okay. So when you see the menu, it says export PDF right to the left, just a little to the left, is a little triangle, tiny little one that pointing towards your right.
Gosh, guys, I am so sorry.
No.
I do not see a
All right,
triangle.
but that's okay.
Well,
That's
let's
okay.
see. I wonder if somebody else could, if I could stop sharing. Does anyone else have my PDF? They could share it off their screen and I could just advance it in that way.
You can go ahead and start talking and then see what I can do.
Okay, should I stop sharing?
And hello,
go
this
ahead
is
and
Shaka
just
from
keep talking.
IAFOR. If you want me to share the screen, then I'm happy to share.
Do you have my PDF?
Yes, I have.
I can.
Okay, then
I can.
I'm gonna stop sharing then, and you can take it
Okay.
away. Okay.
Okay.
All right, here we go. I'm done. All right, you tell me whenever you're ready.
Can you see the screen now?
Craig,
Yes.
this could be the old one.
Oh yeah, no,
Oh,
that's
The one that you sent. Let me share it with you.
I sent. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Okay, this is, may I have the sharing rights, please? Thank you. So I'll go ahead and share the one that I just downloaded from the email. Can you see it?
I can see it. It's a little small
Okay.
here, but
I'll make it bigger.
okay. You'll have to show me later where that arrow is. Okay. All right. The joys of
better?
technology. Great.
Okay.
Okay. So next slide, I guess. There we go. I can't see quite all of it. I don't know if everyone else can. There we go. If that works for everyone else, is that big enough for everyone else to see? That work? I see a few heads nodding. Are we good? Yeah?
I think so.
Okay. So thank you, Keiko, and everybody. The joys of technology. Amazing we can do this at all. But so should I keep going? Are we good? Yes?
Yes,
Okay.
please.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, so this just as oh, anyone? Comment? Okay. All right, so this is the group of people, really, and institutions that's representing, as I said, this multi-year project called the COIL Bevy project. Really got underway last year. It's going to take us a while to sort of really see what we're able to do together, but it involves a lot of different organizations and key people, including Professor Ikeda and many others, and you can see some of them listed. So next slide. So what are we doing? What is the COIL Bevy project? Well, what we're trying to do is we seek to create and sustain a vibrant global community of educators, scholars, students, practitioners, and leaders to develop and disseminate theoretically grounded and empirically supported best practices for virtual exchange, COIL instruction, learning, and evaluation. That's what we do. Next slide. So in terms of understanding the work that we do, these are four of the key questions that we're examining. So from COIL and other forms of virtual exchange, we want to understand who learns what and why and under what circumstances. So for example, how do within group differences, so these are the differences within a class, for example, or a group either studying abroad or doing COIL virtually, how do those dynamics within the group affect the processes and outcomes of virtual learning? Second, what kinds of pedagogies, programs, and platforms are and are not likely to be experienced as most effective and why? Third, could we demonstrate empirically that virtual education and exchange can represent high impact, engaged, and transformative learning? These are systems out there, or paradigms, if you will, in the field that we're trying to see if COIL represents that. And then fourth and finally, what are the major lessons learned from this initiative for the field and professional of virtual education exchange? So implications, applications, best practices, future recommendations. Next slide. Some of the things at a more specific level that we're looking at are, how do we evaluate learning experiences? So COIL, for example, how do we understand learning processes? That is, who learns what and why and under what circumstances? Promoting learning objectives, increased awareness of self, others in the larger world, for example? How can we enhance teaching and program quality? So which experiences, courses, programs have what impact and why? We want to facilitate growth and development of individuals, groups, and organizations. We want to conduct research. We want to understand how, why, and under what circumstances people become, for example, more open to different cultures. We want to address organizational needs. That might be for staff and leadership development. And then, of course, we want to, those of us in a university context, want to comply with assessment and accreditation requirements. So how do our objectives, our learning objectives, actually link to outcomes? Next slide. This is a video which I won't show you now, but perhaps it could be made available to participants later. That was actually developed by the Institute for Innovative Global Education at Kansai University that Keiko Ikeda is part of. And this is where one of the homes basically for the COIL Bevy project over time. So later you can look into that if you'd like to learn more. Next. This is just an example. These are some of our partners who are part of this. This is the American Council on Education and its ACEID2021 system, which allows us to interact on the COIL Bevy project together. Next slide. The SUNY COIL Center, COIL, as many of you know, was one of the main starting points for COIL was the State University of New York system in the United States, and they're also part of the COIL Bevy project and have wonderful resources, as does IIGE. Keiko mentioned also, next slide, that one of the systems that we work with is Class to Class. It's a learning platform that holds a lot of the virtual exchange COIL activities that we do, and they're one of our other partners as well. Next slide. So the Bevy, one of the things that people want to understand, very understandably, is how can you actually measure these very complex processes, these learning processes? And there are lots of models out there, lots of assessment methods out there. And as being heavily involved in the Bevy, the Beliefs, Events, and Values Inventory for many years, I like working with other measurement methods. And so if you are a fan of the Intercultural Development Inventory, for example, that's great. And we do a lot of collaborative work with other measurements. But the one that we're sort of using as a primary mixed methods measure, a measure that includes both quantitative and qualitative assessment, and I'm a big believer in that when you're looking at very complex processes and outcomes like learning as a result of COIL, the Bevy includes both quantitative and qualitative methodologies. It's been around for about 6 years now we've been working with this measure. So what is the Bevy? Well, the Bevy is designed to assess a number of relevant processes and constructs, including but not limited to basic openness, receptivity to different cultures, religions, and social practices, the tendency or not to stereotype in particular ways, self and emotional awareness, and preferred but implicit strategies for making sense of why other people do what they do. I've got a little bit cut off on my screen, but maybe everyone else doesn't. And I can't remember, I think I wrote this years ago. Yep, there it is. Why other people and cultures do what they do. So this is what the Bevy is. And we don't have time here to really get into all the particulars of that, but as I go over some of the scales of the Bevy, as I show you some data from COIL, what we're seeing so far, you'll begin to understand what this measure is a little bit more. Next slide. So a lot of, when you think about how you measure these complex processes, I saw somebody wrote a chat comment a little bit ago about how do you actually measure attitudes and the impact of studying anything. When you think about it like that, what the Bevy measures, what we often think about is, well, what do you learn? The knowledge that you have, the skills that you have as a result of some kind of learning program. It could be a course of study. It could be a single study abroad experience, for example, or it could be, in this case, exposure to collaborative online international learning. So a lot of what when we try to see how are people impacted by the learning experiences that they have, we often focus on things that are observable to us, the results of that. So how do you do on an exam, for example? What is your English acquisition? How much English learning do you demonstrate? We may look at also at behaviors. How do you interact in a group context? How good are you at oral communication, for example? What the bevy is looking at are the underlying drivers, if you will, of these results and behaviors that we see. There, in technical jargon for this, are the mediators and moderators, the formative variables, the life history variables, our ethnicity, our gender, our educational background. The bevy is really measuring these underlying drivers of the stuff that we see. So I don't have time here to get into all of the theory behind the bevy. You are welcome to research that more. There are some resources perhaps at the end of the presentation that you can learn more about this. But the bevy is based on this notion of human beings coming into the world with a core set of needs for attachment, to be known, to achieve one's potential in life. These needs are expressed through our emotional world. How do we feel about self, others, the larger world, and the nature of our relationships and the role of emotions in that? How does all of that get internalized inside us through our life history, our experiences? Then we're looking at the actual beliefs that we have about self, others, and the larger world, which get organized into the values that we have, which get organized further in the attitudes that we have, which get organized further into the worldviews that we have. So how do we see self, others, in the larger world? The bevy has 17 scales on it, including, it takes into account our life history, our background. All of that information gets put together into this mixed methods measure. And then we use that to see from a time one, time two perspective. In other words, where are people at the beginning of a learning experience like COIL? And then where are they at the end of the experience? We call that longitudinal type of assessment, time one, time two assessment. I'm going to show you some of that. So the point here is that if you're trying to understand why people change or why people don't change, or why you, for example, if you've had a study abroad experience and it was wonderful for you, but it wasn't wonderful for someone else, why is that? That's what the bevy is trying to understand, those kinds of processes and phenomena. Next slide. So I'm going to show you now some initial findings. Keiko alluded to some of this a little bit ago, and compare and contrast a bit kind of what we're seeing so far. We're early in our process, so these are initial findings, but quite fascinating. So I'm going to, if you could show me the next slide. Here's an example from worldviews to needs. Does its order matter? Yeah, it does actually. The bevy is based on it's a needs-based theory. If you've heard of people like Abraham Maslow, for example, in Maslow's hierarchy of needs, there are many, many theorists and researchers and practitioners who spend their lives studying the nature of human need. From the standpoint of needs theorists and values theorists, beliefs and values emanate out of core need, core human need. So if we have time, I can try to answer some of that a little bit more, but need is at the core of this. Human need is at the core. Beliefs and values are emergent of, they exist in the service of this core need. So things like what you're looking at in this slide right here, emotional attunement is one of the scales on the bevy. And what you're seeing here is an example of time one, time two data. So at the beginning of a COIL experience, at the end of a COIL plus experience, this one actually was, both COIL and being together in person, you can see that over the course of that experience, this group of participants became more aware of and interested in their own emotional experience and the emotional experiences of others. They became more, these are percentages is what you're looking at. So at the 40th percent to the 51st percentage, their self-awareness increased. It was already high at the 75th percentage, but jumped by 10 percentage points by the end of it. Likewise, the slide down below, what you're seeing is that what the bevy does is it divides up groups into sort of the predisposition, if you will, what we call sort of the potential for learning or growth, high, medium, low, optimal, the ability to change basically. And you can see that both for the lowest, the middle, mine's cut off a little bit on the highest, but that lowest, middle, and highest potential for learning and growth across all three of these areas. People became more open to others at the end of the experience. So next slide. On the other hand, sometimes we learn as much from what doesn't work as we do what does. And it's important to look at that if we're going to approach this from an open-minded perspective. Here you can see that by the end of the experience, essentially across the, within the group itself, there was a tendency for people to become, let's say, and in part this may be what Dr. Ikeda alluded to, that because of the complexity of this high impact learning, by the end of the experience, not everybody was dealing with that complexity in the same way. Some of the individuals were in fact recoiling a bit from the intensity of it and becoming a bit more black and white in their thinking. And that's important to pay attention to this, because what you're seeing on your screen is the fact that within the group itself, there were quite significant differences. Not everybody was prepared equally to be engaging in this COIL experience. And that's one of the things that we're learning already through this work. Next slide. So here, for example, you can also see that, that for the lowest group, the group that was least prepared, if you will, to engage in COIL, they were by the end of the experience becoming more traditional or black and white, if you will, in their thinking about issues of gender. Next slide. So we need to go beyond these aggregate findings, these average findings, to determine who students are before the educational experience occurs. We need to account for within and between group variability, and we need to understand what are the factors that are influencing learning, growth, and development. That's what we need to look at. That's among the things we're learning. Next slide. And who students are before. So here's an example of an overall T1, T2 profile. I'm not going to get into this now, but the point I'm trying to make is that as researchers and educators and practitioners, if we only look at the average scores for the whole group, we shove everybody together, it's not particularly instructive in terms of what's actually happening within our group. Next slide. Here's, and so we need to think about a few things. So COIL, what we can conclude early on and tentatively is that COIL does in fact, Keiko is often asking me, well, you know, how do we know if COIL works? Well, we're seeing that COIL, quote unquote, works. In other words, it does have an impact on people as you would hope it would in terms of high impact, engaged, and transformative learning. We see that in our results already. However, there's substantial variability in terms of within and between group learning. So we have to look at different cohorts and cultures to see how they differ in relation to the experience itself, even before learning happens, because that's going to influence their readiness to learn and their ability to learn. So in assessing and facilitating learning, growth, and development, intercultural awareness and competence may be necessary, meaning just assessing things like intercultural competence. That's really important to look at, but it is by no means sufficient in terms of what we're seeing in the data in terms of how change is occurring. Next slide. Here's an example of what I mean. What you're seeing here, and I'm not going to go over all of this, but if you look down at, well, look at that first slide up there on the very left, thank you, right there under sociocultural openness. You can see, you see that top group there? That is the group that was essentially least prepared to be engaging in the learning experience. The second group down is sort of in the middle range. Both of those groups, so essentially 2/3 of the sample, 2/3 of the this is a group of about 70 students, and about half of them were Japanese. What this is telling us is that by the end of the COIL experience, the Japanese students, in comparison to the international students, they started out less prepared, if you will, in terms of sociocultural openness. And by the end of the experience, they were becoming less open to cultures that were different from their own. That doesn't mean, and I need to be very, very clear on this, that doesn't mean that Japanese students are good, bad, or indifferent. It simply means that that population of students for this particular class was probably needed more time and support than the group of international students on the right-hand side. You can see were already very high on sociocultural openness. This is why I say that just measuring intercultural competence, if that's all you measure, or intercultural development, it's not going to be sufficient, because the two groups, the group of international students was already very high to begin with. In fact, two of the groups, about 2/3 of it, was maxing out the scale. Whereas for the Japanese students, they started off a bit lower, and they were experiencing more difficulties with that by the end of the experience. That's what we mean by within and between group differences. Next slide. Here again, now you're really getting down to the core of what's driving those differences, perhaps, around intercultural competence. And here you can see that from the starting point, the Japanese students were lower on scales like, for example, needs fulfillment. What does that mean? Well, that compared to the international students, that means that the group that was least prepared, what we call the lowest optimal group, to engage in the experience in the first place, in fact, became even less able to sort of deal with the intensity of the emotions that were being evoked in them by the end of the experience than did the international group of students. Likewise, if you see that huge jump there around identity diffusion, you can see that actually the Japanese students, this smaller subset of Japanese students, is becoming less clear about who they are and where they're going in their life than the same group of international students over there on the highest level. Meaning that the two groups, these are fundamentally different groups of people in terms of how they are approaching the learning experience. And it's crucial for us to understand when we're doing high impact learning like COIL, that not everybody benefits in the same way from that. And that tells us, that shows us that we have to take more time and attention and care with the students that we're dealing with, so we know where they're, whether you use the BEVI or not, whatever measurement you use, it's very important that you take responsibility as an educator, a practitioner, a leader, for understanding who our students are at the beginning of the experience. Because as you can see, the Japanese students are struggling a bit more with that. Look down at the bottom on the left there, for example, they are becoming quite substantially less open at the conclusion of this experience. That doesn't mean the Japanese students are good, bad, or indifferent. It just means they're, as human beings, being put into a high impact learning experience, more time, care, attention needs to be devoted to their learning experience. Otherwise, they're not going to be benefiting from COIL to the degree to which international students are. Next slide. I'm just about to wrap up here. So I've already talked about these three first points. I'm just going to finish up. In assessing, I mentioned the first three. That, again, you've heard me say that COIL does have an impact. We can see that already, that it can be characterized empirically from a measurement standpoint as high impact learning. We see that. However, there's a lot of difference going on within and between our groups. So we have to pay attention to these cohort culture differences between our groups. We have to look not only at intercultural development, intercultural competence, it's important, but it's by no means sufficient. Then we can also say, point 4, the courses and programs we design and deliver are often experienced very differently by different cohorts of students. Okay, that's what we're seeing so far. And learning should not be conceptualized simply as cognitive or skill-based, particularly when we are dealing with developmentally, culturally, and affectively or emotionally charged content. And without attending such points and processes, I'm cut off there a little bit on the bottom, don't know if others are, but without attending to such points and processes before, during, and after our interventions, educational experiences may, in some cases, may in fact cause more harm than good. Now, it's possible that at a time 3 longitudinal level, the students that we saw from Japan could rebound, not only to where they were at the beginning, but even go beyond that. But that's the kind of research that we're doing over time to see what's actually happening. Next slide. So the bottom line as I wrap up here is that we need to, in our measurement, in our research, our practice, we need to make sure that our assessment approaches are meaningful, relevant, and they should be fascinating. This should be fascinating work, not boring. And that means that whatever measures people do as they're doing this kind of work around the world with COIL, with virtual exchange and online learning, or study abroad, in-person learning, you need to make sure your measurement is sufficiently reliable and valid. We need to make sure it's culturally sensitive, that it does not reduce the complexity that we are as human beings. We need to make sure that we're looking at multiple processes, as you've already seen a little bit from the data. We need to make sure that the theory we have about who human beings are is sufficiently complex to be able to account for our complexity, because inadequately conceptualized measurement of who human beings are leads to inadequate measures. We need to be able to talk about this stuff in a way that non-measurement people can understand. And then we need to be able to relate all this to real world phenomena. So that's what we're trying to do through the next slide, the COIL Bevy project. These are some of the resources that we can help you. Oh, sorry. These are